Hi everyone, my name is Elaine and today I'm going to be demonstrating how to colour feathers using this design by Josh Lee from the brilliant Colouring Heaven issue Angels and Demons. If you enjoy this tutorial and you'd like to colour along, you can order your own copy from shop.coloringheaven.com and that link will be in the description below. Okay, before we start actually colouring today, I've zoomed us in so you can see the structure of the feather on the finished image here. And you can see the feathers, they're constructed with this main quill down the middle here, this long line like the main stem of the feather. And they're made up, the body of the feather is these little bobs that are attached to the feather, to the main quill, and come up at a diagonal kind of way towards the tip of the feather. And we've shown those by these little diagonal strokes we've got going on here with the pencils. And because of the colours I've used for the feather and because she is an angel, the feather is very light in tone, so this main quill I've left as white, and I've also brought in the gel pen along the edges of the feather here to add a few little sparkles to highlight these kind of bobs coming down into the main stem there, and that's what I'm going to be showing you today. The pencils I'm going to be using today are the Black Widow pencils. I have a few from a few of the different sets here today, and all of the colours might not be used in all of the feathers because I was trying to give them a little bit of an iridescent kind of sheen to them, as if they were shifting the colours in the sun a little bit. But these are the colours that I have picked out and I did use on my finished image. From the Scorpion set we have the Pastel Lemon there, SC74. From the Cobra set we have CB118, that's Grape. We have CB55, that's Tulip, and the rest of them are from the Monarch set. That is Grey Slate MN103, that's Bliss MN073, Light Pink MN101, we have Navy Blue MN123, we have Denim MN083, and we have Milk MN067. And as usual, I will be also using Polychromos in black and in white. The white I tend to use as a blender more than anything. I tend to use that all the time now as a blender, but yeah, that's what I was going for, those colours there. And I started off, as you can see, these feathers don't actually have the lines marked onto them, so I was starting off by giving myself a little bit of a guide and sketching in, hopefully this is showing up on camera, sketching in that main quill there, and this is with the Grey Slate. I was sketching in that main quill down the middle of the feathers there, just to give myself a little bit of a guide of where I'm leaving the white line. And of course that white line down the middle doesn't have to be white, it can be any colour depending on the colours that you use for feathers. But whichever colours you pick, then the structure of the feather will be the same and the technique will be the same. And I was using the Grey Slate just to sketch in where that main quill down the middle was, and to give myself a guide by adding in a few of the little bobs down the outside, like that, just to show that they are there. And I was using this just as a pale kind of shadow colour, and I'm going to add my brighter colours in on top of that with the darker blues and purples to give that kind of iridescent effect, but to have some kind of indication of those bobs coming out from the main quill in the middle. And because these feathers are slightly bigger, we can be a bit more adventurous with our detail. We can add in a few more of the details of the little quills coming out, little bobs from the main quill. We can add a few more of those coming in because these feathers are larger. When it comes down to these feathers on the inside, tiny little feathers, then we can go a little bit more sketchier just to give an indication of the structure of the feather. But for these bigger ones, we can go a little bit more into the detail. Now I'm just using this Grey Slate to shade in shadows where these feathers would be overlapping here. There we go, as these little feathers are coming over the top. And of course this is a kind of an anime style angel because Josh Lee does work in a kind of an anime style. I do love Josh Lee, actually. I do love the style he works in. Not too realistic, so you can get a little bit more adventurous with how you colour his images, which is, yeah, always good for me. So there we go, I've gone in with the Grey Slate and just put in a few of those little kind of bobs in there. The next one I was using is the Tulip, that's Cobra's CB55, adding in a little bit of a brighter colour there, but not right the way along. As I said, I wanted the feathers to be kind of shifting their colour in the sun, and I'm letting the colour fade away towards the end of the feather as well, as this bit here would be in the shadow with the colours more brighter, more darker, and the end of the feather I was thinking would be in the sun, so we're just going to have a little bit of an indication of the structure of the feather there, with our main kind of structure of the feather showing in the shadows. I wasn't being the same with every feather. I was having a bit of fun with my colours because, yeah, the style is, as I said, kind of anime, so you can be a little more adventurous with your colouring here. And I really love this colour, this denim blue. It gives a really nice iridescent kind of colour to the feathers. I was bringing this one in more towards the end of the feathers where they'll be out in the sun. I was bringing in this nice lovely bright blue and leaving these shadow areas for the darker blues and purples. As I said, just dotting it here and there just to give a little bit of shimmery colour onto these feathers. But I was trying to keep them fairly pale, fairly light, and just bringing the darker colours into the shadow. These areas where the feathers are overlapping. So for those areas where the feathers were overlapping, I was bringing in the grape and the navy blue to give some nice strong dark colours here. Again, using these kind of diagonal strokes to give an indication of those barbs of the feather. You can also give a little bit of shade underneath this main quill of the feather, just pressing quite lightly there to show that that is actually, it will be raised a little bit up in the middle of the feather there. You can even add in a few towards the ends, but not too much. Leave it mainly towards these parts where the shadow is over the feathers. There we go, and I was also going in with the grape, which is a lovely dark purple. So I was going in with this grape right into the shadows. You can even use the pencil for a little bit of shading. You don't have to just do little strokes. As long as you have an indication of those, it gives you an idea of the structure of the feather. And every now and then I would put a darker line in like that to show these little bobs. They're not one continuous kind of mass. They do have little breaks in them every now and then. And putting those in, I find, tend to make feathers look a little more kind of realistic, three-dimensional maybe. I'll add in a bit of a shade there for the bottom of that quill. And towards the ends of the feathers, that's where I was bringing in the yellowy colours. This is the milk. Hopefully that will show up on camera. Just to give a little indication that the sun is shining onto those feathers there. Or maybe a little bit of the pale lemon as well for a darker kind of yellow. Just dotting it here and there. As I said, I was trying to give a kind of iridescent kind of feel to them. So I was just going in with layers of all those colours. This is the grey slate again. Yeah, the grey slate again. To add a little bit of shade to these feathers, these bits of the feather that are under in the shadow there. And I'm going to be blending all this with the white polychromos, which is what I like to do recently, is blend my colours with the polychromos. And for these feathers, it was softening the colours, making it a little bit more pastel, more fitting for the kind of angel theme that we're going to have going on here. Once I've layered a few more of these brighter colours maybe into the feathers. And as I've said, you can use any colour for these. I was being a little bit adventurous with her being an angel as well. I was trying to give a nice iridescent effect here, so I was going a bit crazy with my the pastel colours. Now I'm going to try blending that with the white polychromos, and hopefully you'll be able to see that softening those colours, kind of blurring the lines a little bit, because we are kind of into the background here. The feathers are not going to be super detailed. We're going to build up our layers and make these look really fluffy and feathery. And the white pencil might help give a little bit of a base to the white gel pen as well, so you can correct any mistakes a little bit easier if you've gone on top of a pencil rather than on top of the blank paper. I find that works a little bit better to go on top of a layer of white pencil. I think we're looking like this is one of those kind of techniques where you have to trust the process, but this is just the base layers. We are going to be going in a little bit more with our colours there. Okay, this is the tulip. I'm going to shade onto that central kind of quill a little bit there, to make that look as if it has a little bit of shade, a little bit of form to it, where it's going into the shadows of those other feathers underneath there. These little bobs tend to be a little bit thicker towards the end of the feather, I think, towards the fat end, shall we say, the wider end of the feather. They tend to be a little bit denser down there, so there will be less definition to our little lines, but as long as we've got some kind of indication that we do have Little kind of fluffy quills coming out there. Just some indication that we have some little fluffy bobs coming out there from the main shaft, from the main quill. Of course, I suppose that would depend really on how fluffy you want to make your feathers look. But here we go, I'm going in with the black polychromos now to really define those shadows. Any little, I don't want to go too overboard because the feathers, as I've said, I want those to be fairly light. Really pressing quite hard with that bright blue. I think that really does help with the iridescence. That bright blue, kind of like a magpie maybe. The iridescent feathers. Just in places. Just to give an effect of that colour shifting a little bit in the sun, I think. A little bit of the pink. This is the Bliss, the pink. To show that purple is kind of fading out. A more purpley colour. More towards the pink as we head out into the light there. And because that is behind this feather with the dark navy blue, we're going to add a few little gaps into that one there. And that is something I did with the background onto mine as well, onto the finished image. I did pick a dark background colour. If you're doing light colours, picking a dark colour for the background would help, because you can do these little gaps like so into the actual feather. And on mine I did do a black and sort of navy blue background. A little bit of hatching like that, to blend into a more dark blue colour. But I was using the black here to make little indents into the form of these feathers to give a more fluffy effect for the edges. It kind of makes the feathers look a little bit more realistic, I find anyways. A few of those little kind of indent lines. You can even do them down this end. And just to show you that putting the dark background behind helps bring out the kind of form of these feathers. I will fill in this background a little bit here with the black polychromos. And I'll bring in a little bit of this Aquarius colour, one that I did not mention at the beginning, but I wasn't sure I'd be showing how to do the background. But just to show how to add those little notches into the edges of the feathers, I'll bring in the Aquarius colour. This is from the Cobra set, this CB81 Aquarius. Just bringing that in for a little bit of colour into the background. And especially keeping it dark around the edges of these feathers. I'm going to go over that with the black actually, just to leave a hint of that Aquarius colour showing through. And any kind of background you could probably do that with, as long as you went in and did these little marks with the same kind of colour as what's in the background as what would be behind them. In the very shadows you could use the black, but whatever colour is behind them. As the feathers are not actually drawn that way, we do have a continuous line, so breaking that up with the black, I'll show again here, gives the illusion that the feather is kind of broken up a tiny little bit, makes it look a little bit more natural, even with the kind of fantasy kind of colours we've got going on with them. Okay, just a few feathers to show the kind of effect that I was going for. And these may have been looking slightly different from my original image, but I was playing it by ear really, trying to give that sort of iridescent effect. The colours don't make that much difference. I think the thing that matters is showing that kind of form of the feather. And I was also, as I am wont to do, going in with a white gel pen, highlighting that middle kind of quill down the middle, and a few of these lines of the actual feathers, a few of the barbs themselves, adding a little bit of sparkle and defining the edges, as we are talking angel wings here. And a more kind of stylized approach, because we are colouring an anime style image, so as I've said, you can be a little bit more freer, a little bit more arty I suppose, with how you do your actual feathers. Although of course there's no need at all to bring in the white gel pen if you don't think you're wanting it. If you don't need it, then yeah, feel free to do away with that. But I think it gives a nice little sparkle, especially as we're we're colouring an angel here. And yeah, going in with more layers, building up the feather, but keeping that structure we started with. Especially coming out towards the end, because yeah, the bobs do tend to get a little bit more sparser towards the end of the feather. And there we go. I think this one maybe needs a little bit more attention. We should give him a little bit more of this pink, the bliss this one is. I was just using the navy blue to add a little bit more of the darker tone. But these colours, fairly random, just adding them in as and when I feel like. The main point is the structure and getting this kind of texture with the main line down the middle, little kind of fluffy bobs coming out from there. I'm putting in these little kind of nicks into the edges. I always find that makes feathers look a little bit more natural. This is the tulip. As with all things, it's as little or as much as you want to give it, really. Depends how much you want these colours to fade off towards the end of the feathers, how much of a rainbow effect you want to be getting here. As you can see, just keeping the diagonal lines heading out from this central line here, curving maybe towards the tip. Gonna give a little bit of the denim blue to this top feather here. I think we need a bit more of the white gel pen along there, maybe a little bit of the black. Bringing in these notches again into the feather. Not too many of them, just a couple, one or two, just to show that these little bobs, they're not one solid mass. They are little kind of fluffy strands that do have gaps in them. And again, I'm going to come in with the white gel pen here. This is the Uniball Signo white gel pen, and you definitely do not have to use that. It's just a personal preference, something I use to be kind of decorative. Add a few more details. And there we go. That's the kind of idea that I was using to draw those bigger feathers there. And for the smaller feathers, I was going into a little bit less detail for the smaller feathers. And maybe keeping to more of a imaginary line down the middle. Doing some lines for that side and then top side. You can even just do the one line. Be super sketchy, just do the one line. As long as you have some sort of indication of these feathery bobs going on, then I think, yeah, you'll have it looking like feathers. And sometimes the line down the middle of the feather, just to show that, so sometimes the line down the middle of the feather can be more towards the top or more towards the bottom. Depending on the perspective, if you're looking more towards this edge of the feather, then the central line would be a little bit higher up. If you're looking down that side of the feather, the central line would be a bit lower down, and you would work on that accordingly as to where the central line would be. Sometimes the central line down the edge of the feather could actually be right along the top like this, which I think I actually did in my original picture, yeah, along the top like that. In which case you would only have one set of they are diagonal lines coming in this direction. And because this feather is bigger and towards the front, we can be a little bit more detailed with our lines there. And keep that top line there, just to be the central kind of quill down the middle of the feather. And build up all our layers of colours as we did on the smaller feathers. You can see here the central line I've kept quite towards the top there, and just gone in with the detail of the quills, gone into a bit more detail there, left a lot more white along these feathers here because these ones are coming in front, so I will show you that as well. These kind of larger feathery kind of masses where the feathers are not individually picked out, I was using the yellow. This is the milk, a kind of a creamy yellow, just to indicate where the light would be hitting that kind of joint of the wing there. Maybe the edges of the feathers. And using a kind of sketchy, I wouldn't quite say scribbly, but using a diagonal stroke of the pencil, Hopefully that is showing up on camera. This is the pastel lemon, just to give a bit of a darker yellow. I do there. And because those parts of the feathers, the wings, are closer to us, closer to the camera, I was bringing in a bit more of the purpley colour next to the yellow, because that gives us a lot of contrast, which helps to bring things forward, bring things to our attention. So you can maybe add a bit more of your purple there, or your contrasting colour, just a little bit of shading, just to show a little bit of form there. I might bring in the bliss, the pink, depending on what colours you are actually using, what colour you want your wings to be. You can adjust those colours. I think I used a little bit more of the denim blue in my original picture, just to give a little bit of an iridescent effect, and then blend that with the white polychromos. And as these feathers would be really tiny, they're not the big flight feathers such as these, and they're even smaller than these ones here. So I was just blending all that with the white polychromos to give some sort of iridescence, some sort of form to it, and not going into too much detail. Maybe bring in a bit of the grape there, I think, to show that it's kind of darker. Yeah, show that it's darker, leading the way. And I'm using some sort of short diagonal strokes there, just to indicate some sort of fluffiness. There might be some sort of feathery texture going on there. It's all about texture, really, when you are colouring feathers. I'll go in with the white again to blend those out. And what I was doing on my original, once I'd done all my shading, put all my form into those feathers there, I was going on and adding a few little white gel pen sparkles, again because she is an angel, and I was trying to give her wings kind of an iridescent, sort of sparkly effect. So I was just going in and adding a few sparkles like that. I think we might need a little bit more shading behind those feathers. This is just to add in a little bit of shading behind those feathers there. Maybe a bit more of the denim blue. And there you go. A little bit of iridescence, a little bit of form to those wings there, but not so much detail. We don't really have to put in all the different, the barbs going each separate way there. And for smaller feathers, this is the grey slate, and these feathers here are really small, so there's not going to be much detail on those at all. So what I did in my original was just give the one layer of diagonal strokes there, just showing a little bit of texture, and added some white gel pen and fluffy lines along the edges, again to give the suggestion of texture of feathers. So how I did that, I went in first with the grey slate, which I was using as a sort of sketch colour to block in most shadows, try and figure out how things would be working. Of course you could add in a little bit of a suggestion of the main quill down the middle. But because these were further back, they were kind of darker, they're behind the main subject of the picture. I was just giving a little bit of suggestion with the diagonal lines. So as in the main image for these feathers here, I was just adding in just a suggestion with using diagonal strokes, just to give a suggestion of that kind of feather texture, and a little bit of sketchiness to maybe play into the anime style of the image, which is a gorgeous image. It was a pleasure to colour this one. And yeah, adding in the kind of sketchy texture as well, as you can see with those diagonal lines. Just trying to suggest the feathers really more than anything there. And we're probably going to have more shadows underneath here. This is the tulip. There we go, just suggesting there's some sort of texture in there. Keeping it really sketchy here, as I said, just to give the idea of texture. You can again go in with all your different colours, leaving of the edges of the feathers to be lighter and bringing in the other colours around the edges to give a little indication again of that kind of iridescent effect that I was trying to get by bringing in all the different colours. This is the pale lemon, just to give a little indication of that. And because these are in the shadows, I did go in quite heavily with the darker colours like the navy blue. Again, still using the hatching kind of texture strokes, so even though we're not actually putting the the lines onto the feathers, each side, the little barbs. We're not putting them into the feathers because I think that would be too much detail for something that's so far away. So we're just adding in this suggestion of texture. Let's go in with the grape to make sure these areas are in the shadow. This part of her wing is behind her arm, it's behind this main bit of the wing here. And once we go over that and blend it with the polychromos white, that will knock those colours back slightly. That will fade those out and not so detailed once they're blended. So you can of course go on top, give a lot more layers, really deepen that colour, make that colour a lot richer, depending on what colours you are using for your feathers. I would keep to the same technique. Anything that's further in the background has less detail anyways. You can even bring in that black, really highlight the shadows there. As it is, I don't really like to use black usually very much for shading, but because this is more of an anime style image and I was using black for the background, so we already had black in the image, I will just show you the little fluffy edges I was giving these feathers here. That's another little technique you can maybe use for feathers. Just fill in a little bit of black there and then go in with the Aquarius, which is also from the Cobra set, this one. I used it in my own background. There we go, a little bit of a background going on there. And what I did with these feathers in the original image, I took the white gel pen and just broke this outline line with some little white strokes of white. You can see there, just to make the feathers look a little bit fluffier, because these are the smaller feathers. And these bits of the wings here, and of course I gave little sparkles as I did down there. We gave the little sparkles. And you could add in some sort of indication of the middle quill in a few places. You could finish off this bigger feather just to give an indication of how I would go about doing a big old feather like this one. And the same technique as we've used on these little feathers here. Just coming in with the colours fairly randomly to give that kind of iridescent effect. Making sure they get paler towards the end of the feather, because I wanted the dark colours to be towards the base. This was the denim blue that I used, and this is the pastel lemon. There was a lot more white that I left onto this feather down here, I think, because this one was way out in the front, and the background I'd shaded to be dark grey or black, so I had left a lot of more white onto this feather here. Came in with a lot more of the white gel pen because I wanted that to stand out from the background, which was dark, and shading, or blending rather, with the white polychromos. That was blurring my lines a little bit and making the colours seem a little bit paler. So that worked really well to bring that feather forwards. And I was pressing a lot harder, again with the denim blue, I was pressing a lot harder to get my colours be a lot brighter, which again helps things come forwards, is when the colours are brighter with a lot of contrast, which is why we should be using the tulip, the purple, with this yellow to give a little bit of contrast to bring that feather forward. I'll bring in the grey slate for a little bit of a shadow colour for that central point of quill there, making sure it looks as if it's raised along those lines. And the white gel pen with some little kind of dotty highlights. There we go, white gel pen with a few little dotty highlights, just for a little bit of fun, a little bit of sparkle to the feathers. Maybe for that central kind of quill down the middle. This possibly needs a little bit more. Let me see, maybe the grey. So that is the main idea. That is these strokes, these little bobs. Those are the main thing you have to concentrate on it to make a feather look kind of realistic. I'm bringing in a few little breaks. There we go. Even if they're not already drawn onto the feather, onto your picture, you can add them in, a few little breaks like that. I find that makes the feathers look a little bit more realistic. Of course, especially with light feathers like this, we don't go too crazy with them. Again, bringing in the original picture, as you can see I've put a few of the little breaks there. I've kept the strokes quite light here as this piece of the feather is coming towards the front of our angel, curving around her dress. And because her dress I have shaded quite darkly in the background there, I've kept the feathers really quite light here, really quite light without going in too much with the navy blue or the grape. I've kept the feathers quite light so that the background could be shaded and the feathers would be standing out with being a lot lighter. And I think, yeah, that's about all there is to colouring feathers. So we're going to recap if we look at what we did at first. This is the main idea of the central shaft, the central kind of quill there going down the middle of the feather, and the barbs attaching to the feather at a diagonal. I'll bring in both so we can see. The central shaft down the middle there, the quill, and these barbs coming out at an angle, heading towards the tip of the feather. We can bring in these breaks in the outline of the feather, even if they're not drawn, especially if you put in a darker background. If you see here, I've put in the darker background, especially so I can put in these little breaks on the edges of the feather, cutting into the main mass there, just to make it look as if it's not completely solid, because feathers are not completely solid. They are formed of these little barbs. And I've also brought in the white gel pen, as you've seen there, made them look a little bit more decorative, a little bit more semi-realistic, because our Josh Lee, I love his pictures, he does these awesome anime style pictures, and because they are more towards the anime style, more semi-realistic, we can bring in the more decorative. With the white gel pen, we don't have to be completely realistic. I also showed you these small feathers here. These small feathers, and on the original image I've worked those up. I've also showed you these small feathers here where we've kept the detail fairly kind of blurred detail because these are further back, so we haven't put as much in. We've suggested the texture of feathers by bringing in this kind of hatched technique, the hatching, to show there's some sort of texture there going on in the little feathers. And I've added these white lines, fluffy white lines around the edges. I'll bring in the original. We can see they're exactly the same. I've kept the detail fairly blurred, just bringing in the diagonal strokes to show a little bit of texture, show there is some feathers going on there. And I've brought in the little fluffy white lines along the edges. Also, where you have a mass of feathers, such as on this wing here, we'd concentrate more on the actual shape of the wing rather than each individual feather, because you wouldn't be able to see them. So we just give a sort of sense of shape to the edge of the wing there, and I've added a few little kind of sparkles because we do have an angel, so her wings, yeah, fairly well might be sparkly and iridescent, so we've added a few little sparkles there. Onto the original, the finished image, we can see there, just showing a little bit of form, shading around the edges there, giving a little bit of a roundness to these wings, but not really going into showing the roundness of the wings, but not going into the detail of each individual feather because you wouldn't be able to see them. And again, the little sparkles. And for this feather on the bottom here, I was showing that your central quill, it will change its position. It is actually down the actual middle of the feather, but depending on how you're looking at the feather, we're looking at this one sideways, I think, from what we can see there. We're looking at that one sideways. So the central quill of the feather would be more towards the top. And because this feather is coming out in front of our angel, in front of her dress, which was shaded with the dark greys, I made this one a lot lighter, but still kept the strokes of these little barbs going in, added a few little breaks in the contour of the feather to make it look a little bit more realistic. If we bring in the original, we can see there exactly the same. I kept the feather really light here, a few little breaks coming in along the edges of the feather, a lot of white gel pen and the little sparkles, and there we go. If you've enjoyed this tutorial and this design, don't forget you can order your own copy of Colouring Heaven Collection, issue 110, Angels and Demons, from the online shop. Just head to shop.colouringheaven.com or click the link in the description. We'd love to see your colouring in our Friends of Colouring Heaven Facebook group. Please like, subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss out on future Colouring Heaven videos. Bye!